In this video, I'm going to show you the step-by-step process of how I turned this 3D rendering into a real piece of furniture. The first thing I did was start working on the sides. The sides are made from cherry, and here I am cutting down the panels to their final dimension. As you can tell by the title of the video, this piece of furniture focuses around the houndstooth dovetail joint. While this joint looks very intimidating and complicated, the key is in the layout. If you lay it out properly, it makes cutting the joint a lot more simple and not as intimidating as you might think. This was a quick montage of me laying out that process. With the joint laid out, it's now time to start cutting. I was told that there's two ways to cut dovetails, tails first and the wrong way. So I obviously cut tails first. While this isn't an in-depth video of how I cut dovetails and in specifically the houndstooth dovetail, I will show a quick few seconds of each step in the process. If you have any questions on individual processes, on what I do and the order I do them in, leave a comment below or reach out to me and I'd be glad to answer those questions. With the tails cut, that wraps up the side of the cabinet. Now it's onto the top. For the top, I'm using 8/4 walnut, and I'm going to cross cut it to length and then rip it to width. Because it is such a thick piece of wood, I will use the domino to joint the two pieces together to form a strong top. With the top glued up, it's right back to layout. As you can see, I'm using 3 different marking gauges because I have 3 different depths to mark. I don't want to reuse the same marking gauge in case I need that setting in the future. Then I transfer the tails over to the pin board. In my opinion, this is the most crucial step for dovetails. If you don't have an accurate layout line, it's really difficult to make an accurate cut. Now it's time to cut the pins. I use my dovetail saw to cut to both baselines, but most of the work for this pin is going to be done with a chisel. To cut this one socket, it took me about 20 minutes, just going back and forth between different size chisels to remove a lot of the bulk waste and then clean it up to make it look nice. Don't worry, I'll speed it up so you don't have to watch all 20 minutes of this one socket. For this one side, there's 7 other sockets to cut. While I use the houndstooth dovetails to connect the sides to the top, I'm just using regular through dovetails to connect the bottoms to the sides. I forgot to film me cutting the tails of these sideboards, but here I am cutting the through pins. It's quite a bit different than the houndstooth pins. As you can see, I'm using my dovetail saw and a fret saw to remove the waste instead of using chisels. On the right side of the cabinet, there's going to be a single shelf. To attach the shelf to the sides of the cabinet, I'm going to use the domino. You can see here that I attach the shelf and use it as a fence to get a 90-degree plunge cut using the domino to make sure it lines up perfectly. Continuing on the right side of the cabinet, I'm laying out the hardware for the door. I'm using Brusso brass knife hinges. These are really elegant but can be a little finicky to install. I've done them a few times and I've gotten a few tricks down. It's a lot of chisel work. I prefer to do it with a chisel instead of the router and the guide that you can purchase. I just feel like this is more accurate. And it slides in with a perfect fit. A quick progress shot to show you where we are in this build process. The carcass of the cabinet is glued together and the inside is finished with Rubio. Onto the door. This door is created using the domino, and now I'm trying to get the internal dimensions for the panel. I use this using 2 scraps of plywood and then taking that dimension and transferring it over to the panel. Now I transfer the other internal dimension, and this is going to be the outline for my internal panel. To cut the panel down, I'm going to use my track saw. This gives me a very accurate cut. To do this, I just lay some insulation on the top of my bench, just so I don't cut through. Now I dry fit the door to make sure the internal panel fits perfectly. Unfortunately, this isn't the final door that I go with. My math was off, and I made the door a little bit too small for the opening, and had to create a second door. With that second door created, I start to lay out the knife hinges that go in the actual door itself. It's a very similar process. I laid out using my combination square, and then I reference the physical hinge itself, and then just a lot of chiseling. Again, I think this is a lot more accurate than using the router and the guide that you can purchase. If you're not confident with your chisel skills, the guide is always a great option to go with, and that's how I did do my first few. I just find a better fit using the chisels. For this build, I decided to put my brand on the inside of the door. With the door branded, the right side of the cabinet is complete, and now it's time to move to the left. On the left side, I'm going to have 3 drawers. The slides that I'm using are Blum Motion undermount slides. To get the proper depth setting, I use a marking gauge, and then I secure each one. To get the proper height, I created a template that I use each time to make sure that each slide lines up perfectly and there's no deviation in the height. You can see I use Bessie trigger clamps to secure that template, and then I use another Bessie trigger clamp to secure that slide to lock in that depth setting while I drill it into place. With the drawer slides installed, now I can take the proper measurements to figure out the size of the drawers. Then I get the material down to thickness. I use 1/2 inch cherry for my drawer boxes. With Blum undermount slides, it's very particular on where the drawer bottom sits. Here I have a depth setting to see how deep the dado goes, and then I use that same block to mark where the fence goes so it sits in the proper location. With the router table set up, it's time to cut the through dados. This is going to be on the pin boards, and the tail is going to cover that up so it doesn't matter. For the tail boards though, I do have to do stop dados, so I drop the piece down onto the bit, and then I have a mark where I stop at. It's really important to make sure I don't blow out each end, or else the drawer box isn't going to look very great. With the material prepped, now it's time to go to the layout. Since all 3 drawers are the same, it makes the layout a lot simpler. I mark the half tails and then use dividers to mark out the full tails. Then I use my Veritas saddle square to mark out the tail lines to make sure that it's a profile that I like. With everything laid out, I use my dovetail saw to cut the tails out, and then use the fret saw to cut out the waist. The easiest part of cutting dovetails, cutting off that half pin. Again, now it's time to transfer those tails over the pin board. Very important step. And then I just cut out the pin sockets. Use the dovetail saw first to cut to the baselines, and then use the fret saw to remove all of the waste. Once everything is cut, it's just about dry fitting and making sure I have a tight joint. A few taps with the mallet and everything looks good. Like I said earlier, with Blum undermount slides, everything has to be precise. To fit the slides, you have to cut a slot in the back of the drawer where the slide can actually run. To do this, I use a saw and then chisel out the waist. Next, I use the rockler jig to drill the indexing pin. This allows the slide to meet perfectly with the drawer box. The same jig allows me to pre-drill holes for the front brackets. Then I attach the brackets with some small screws, and the drawer box is ready to go. Next, I pre-drill some holes that will later be used to secure the drawer front. These drawer pulls are very interesting. It's a custom thing that I designed myself. It uses a brass rod with a hole in the center that you can grab the brass rod on. To make the hole, I use a Forstner bit. With the hole drilled out, I then use my router to create a groove in the front that allows the brass rod to sit in. This groove is about 1/4 inch deep, so the brass rod sits out about 1/4 inch. One thing I want to note is look at the dust collection on this Festool router. I understand it's pricey, but with a 1/2 inch dado, you can't see any dust that's being produced. To fit the drawers, I use some cards to shim out the drawer perfectly and then attach it using screws. I then screw in from the back to firmly secure it, and then I attach the brass drawer pull. These drawer pulls are custom made at a local machine shop for me. They're cut to perfect size and then tapped using a 1/4 bolt. If anyone's interested in some of these, let me know. With the case complete, now it's time to move on to the base. For this, I am cutting a 15-degree splay. This is going to give it a very modern design. To attach the base together, I'm using the domino. If you look how I'm holding these pieces for the domino, you see I created a jig. If you stay tuned, I should have a video later on. Now time for the glue up. Unfortunately, my camera failed right here, and I wasn't able to record the full thing. For the feet of the base, I decided to add adjustable feet. This is because we all know no floor is level, and so this will allow the client to make sure that the case sits perfectly level on their floor. To install the adjustable feet, I use an 1.25" Forstner bit to the proper depth, and then I use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit to create a recess for the threaded inserts. The threaded inserts that came with these feet were plastic, so I threw those away and decided to go with some Rampatech threaded inserts. These really are the best threaded inserts I've used, and I highly recommend them. To attach the case to the base, I use more Rampatech threaded inserts. You just drill a hole and then use an Allen wrench to put in the threaded insert. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed watching the build process of the houndstooth dovetail modern cabinet. If you like this video and want to watch similar content, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you have any feedback or questions, please leave it down below in the comment section. There's also links to all my other social media and my website below. This build process was pretty fun and it went pretty smoothly, but if you remember to my Instagram, there was one hiccup. I originally made another door, but I cut it too small. So stick around and I'm going to be building a second cabinet focused around this door, and I have some pretty cool ideas in mind. Thank you so much again for watching and have a great day.